It is evident that one of the biggest challenges of the 21st century is the concept of climate change. The developments in modern society have caused unprecedented environmental impacts, and we are now only beginning to consider this a climate emergency. We are now faced with the challenge of dealing with climate change and preventing its potentially detrimental impacts on our planet. The Earth's current warming trend is of particular significance because it can almost certainly be attributed to human activity and, more particularly, the Industrial Revolution. The most concerning part is that evidence has found that these current trends are occurring at an unprecedented rate compared with previous warming trends in the Earth's history. Atmospheric carbon dioxide has significantly increased since the Industrial Revolution. Carbon dioxide and other gases have heat-trapping abilities, and therefore, this raises no question that increased levels of these gases in the Earth's atmosphere has significantly contributed to the phenomena known as global warming. The evidence for climate change is compelling. Temperature rise, warming oceans, shrinking ice sheets, decreased snow cover, sea level rise, declining Arctic sea ice, extreme weather events, and ocean acidification. These environmental impacts are significantly impacting a society and our planet as a whole. For this reason, environmental organisations are pushing to declare a climate emergency. There are growing concerns for the future of our planet, and there are calls for urgent changes to be made. It makes sense that we will have to adjust all aspects of our lives to deal with the developing issue of climate change. This brings to light issues surrounding current social and business environments and practices that need to be altered in order to effectively deal with the issue of climate change. Know a little bit about climate change, we can explore the impact it is having on our modern business environment and society as a whole. We understood that climate change is not just an environmental problem. While its devastating impacts on the environment cannot be understated, climate change also has an impact on businesses, and these effects will only intensify as climate change worsens. Such effects consist of weather events and patterns linked to climate change will have the potential to disrupt business operations. This not only leads to damage, but can cause financial distress due to lost operations and repair costs. Extreme weather events comes the impact on the availability and cost of valuable resources. Severe droughts and weather patterns can affect crops and use for food and other products, as well as hinder the transportation of resources. The disruptions to supply chains will make obtaining resources and materials increasingly challenging for businesses. Changing climate comes a change in demand. For example, as global temperatures rise, it is certainly reasonable to assume that demand for winter goods and heating oil will decline. It's also safe to predict that changes in regulations and government policy to deal with climate change will impact business environments and current economic models. There are a number of aspects that may become subject to government regulation, such as manufacturing processes and waste disposal, and businesses will have to comply with these. As alterations would be required to existing operations, businesses will experience increased costs of compliance, and there is potential for fines or lost revenue in not meeting these standards. As a result of increased acceptance of the issue of climate change in society, public pressure has the potential to cause detriment to business. A shift in attitudes and buying patterns means that society is looking towards supporting and purchasing more environmentally friendly goods and sustainable practices. There is an expectation that businesses are socially responsible and aim to minimize their environmental impacts. Business environments have welcomed much change to become what it is today. Capitalism has reduced the number of people living below the poverty line and has transformed the world we live in. Global hunger is declining and more people have access to healthcare and education, with the size of the global middle class increasing. However, this growth has just put pressure on the planet. Globalization has resulted in higher consumer spending, which generates a greater demand for energy, the majority of which is sourced from fossil fuels. As such, the business environment is faced with a new challenge moving forward in respect of the current climate change emergency. Therefore, the question on everyone's lips is whether it is possible to create a future that is environmentally sustainable without compromising our current economic model and the growth that we have already built today. So, What changes should we expect to see in business environments to understand and cope with climate change? There has already been a shift in attitudes and positive changes in the area of environmental sustainability. Many organisations are already moving in the right direction, and we have seen this through the phasing out of single-use plastics, such as plastic bags and plastic straws. This demonstrates the willingness of organisations to be eco-friendly, but there is still a long way to go. There is immense pressure for larger scale changes. However, these have the potential to negatively impact our economy. A recent report by the Climate Accountability Institute found that over half of global industrial emissions since human-induced climate change was officially recognised can be traced to just 25 corporate and state-producing entities. The majority of these are coal and oil producing companies. To put this into perspective, Chinese coal production has tripled to nearly 4 billion tonnes, representing half of global output. That is a massive operation. Therefore, we should expect to see some changes within fossil fuel extraction industries to slow the effects of climate change on our planet. Gas companies have already undertaken modelling prior to climate change becoming the issue it is today in order to cost and manage reserves. These companies are now using these models to analyse scenarios where global emissions are constrained in order to reduce their environmental impacts and to avoid dangerous climate change. To reduce their carbon footprint, fossil fuel companies can reduce operational emissions, shift to lighter fossil fuels, engage in the deployment of carbon capture, utilisation and storage, and other carbon offset options, as well as diversify their portfolio of primary energy products to include renewables. These measures will contribute to a decoupling of growth and emissions, maximising the growth achievable by a company under an emissions cap. On the other hand, we will experience continued growth in the renewable energy sector, which is made up of bioenergy, geothermal, hydroelectric, solar and wind. In fact, according to data provided by jobs listings search engine Indeed, in the first quarter of 2014 in the UK, job postings in the renewable energy sector accounted for nearly a third of all energy sector job postings in that period. That number has since risen to over 50% of all energy sector job postings. In contrast, job postings for oil and coal industries in the UK fell from approximately 66% to 47%, which is evidence of just one aspect of transformation which is occurring to combat climate change. As the saying goes, it takes 20 years to build a reputation and just 5 minutes to ruin it. The same goes for environmental reputations, and they can be just as hard to rebuild. Based on the attitudes of society so far, if businesses choose not to take steps in the right direction and make an effort to reduce their carbon footprint, there will almost certainly be dire consequences for those businesses, and that will potentially have an impact on our economy also. For businesses to remain profitable as we move towards a more sustainable environmental approach, it is necessary to embrace the pressures placed on them by their customers and the wider communities by acting ethically and responsibly. It is possible that many businesses will be damaged as we become less tolerant towards environmental damage. The boycotting of companies has already been a common occurrence in society due to unethical environmental and social practices. Boycotts have the ability to destroy a company's reputation, and in order to remain socially accepted, companies need to ensure they are promoting themselves and also acting responsibly and ethically and implementing sustainable environmental practices into their operations. We have already seen and will continue to see intervention from governments to deal with the impacts of climate change. The government will play a significant role in the development of regulations aimed at limiting emissions, which will impact the way in which organisations manufacture and produce, and there is already immense pressure on governments to step up and initiate the necessary changes. Climate change has emerged as a strategic priority for many governments over the past decade. Governments have become increasingly focused on implementing sustainable practices in order to effectively deal with major challenges of the 21st century. such as urbanisation, resource scarcity, economic volatility, and importantly, climate change. In fact, the focus of the United Nations Summit to be held this month is renewable energy, emissions reductions, sustainable infrastructure, sustainable agriculture and management of forests and oceans, withstanding climate impacts, and investing in the green economy. The fact that these topics are at the forefront of the agenda gives an indication of just how much is being done to address climate change and the changes that we can expect to see in the coming years. As Margaret Thatcher said during her 1988 speech to Britain's scientific elite, stable prosperity can be achieved throughout the world, provided the environment is nurtured and safeguarded. Protecting this balance of nature is therefore one of the greatest challenges of the late 20th century. This quote puts into perspective the importance of the environment and how integral it is to ensure its future sustainability for generations to come. Ultimately, moving forward, we need to establish a balance between our need to prevent worsening climate change and the effects that such prevention methods will have on our economy. Thank you for listening to this presentation, and I hope you learned something about climate change and its impacts on our global changing business environment.